The morning light had barely touched the lake when I saw her charging toward me. Arms stiff, eyes blazing, panic shaking every step she took. She still believed this land obeyed her. She had no idea. The lake was mine now, and her backyard was merely trespassing. Stay till the end, because this is the day arrogance finally ran into a wall it couldn't climb. The morning was unsettlingly calm. One of those rare silences where the world seems to hold its breath before a storm. The lake gleamed like polished glass, motionless under the soft haze of dawn. As I stepped onto the old wooden dock, the cool mist brushed across my face, carrying the faint scent of fresh water and pine. In the distance, a bird skimmed the surface, wings slicing through gold-tinted reflections. The folder in my hand felt heavier than paper, heavier than ink. It carried a truth that would reshape everything around me. Today, nothing would remain the same. Then she appeared, Karen. Not from her door, but from her ego. Her heels stabbed the wooden path with sharp, territorial clicks as she power-walked toward me. Dressed in her bright pink blazer, chin lifted like she owned the sunrise itself, she looked every bit the tyrant the neighborhood had endured for years. But today, something flickered beneath her anger, an uneasiness she couldn't hide. When her eyes landed on the folder in my hand, her stride faltered. It was the look a ruler gives a sword they know is meant for them. For the first time, she was afraid. She stopped abruptly, confusion and fury wrestling behind her stiff smile. Even without speaking, her expression screamed, "This lake is mine." I didn't respond. Instead, I unzipped the folder slowly, deliberately, letting the tension coil in the air like a drawn bowstring. Her breath hitched. She recognized the type of document it held before she ever saw the words. Her gaze snapped to the embossed seal on the top page. Authority, legality, finality, the kind of document that snaps illusion in half. Her shoulders sagged as if something inside her cracked. Reality was stepping onto the stage, and she hated it. I held the document out just enough for the sunlight to catch the seal. She inhaled sharply as her eyes locked onto the line she never imagined she would read. East Shore Lake, transfer of full ownership. For years, she had ruled this place like some self-appointed queen. She shouted at kids playing too close. She sent warnings to fishermen. She demanded obedience from neighbors who just wanted peace. But today, the kingdom she imagined belonged to her crumbled in her hands. Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. No, this can't be real. But the lake shimmered, indifferent. Truth had risen. A soft breeze stirred the pages, as if nature itself wanted to turn them faster. Her backyard stretched behind her. Green lawn, stolen shoreline, the illegal mini-dock she built without permission, each one a monument to the lie she lived in. I glanced toward the boundary she pretended didn't exist, the one buried under years of intimidation. "You're mistaken." Her eyes seemed to plead. But the truth was merciless today. "Your yard ends here," I said gently, tapping the map. "Everything beyond that was never yours." Her pride cracked like thin ice, and beneath it lay nothing but fear. She stepped closer, too close, as if standing near me would somehow reverse the document's authority. Her voice hardened, trying to mimic the power she no longer had. "Do you even know who you're challenging? I run this community." But the HOA board members behind her didn't step forward. They didn't nod. They didn't defend her. Instead, their eyes dropped to the ground, ashamed, relieved, finally unshackled. The woman who had barked orders at them for years suddenly looked small, shaken by a truth she couldn't bully away. The lake was no longer bending to her voice. It answered only to mine now. I walked toward the water's edge, feeling the cool, damp breeze wrap around me like a quiet reassurance. This wasn't victory, it was release. For years, the neighborhood lived in an atmosphere shaped by her temper, her threats, her endless need for control. Kids avoided her yard like a haunted zone. Neighbors whispered rather than spoke. But today, the silence felt different. Lighter. The lake rippled gently, as if exhaling for the first time in years. I hadn't just bought a body of water. I had restored balance. And she knew it. Her reign wasn't fading. It was ending. Then came the roar of the engine. A construction truck rolled down the gravel road and stopped near the shoreline. Workers stepped out, carrying survey flags, measurement rods, boundary stakes, and the heavy authority of legal maps. Karen's face drained of color. She staggered backward as the crew unrolled their blueprints, each line drawn with precision, each mark more undeniable than her rules ever were. They began identifying the real boundary, the one she ignored, the one she violated, the one now cutting straight through her backyard. For the first time in her life, she looked helpless. She ran from one worker to another, waving her arms, barking orders nobody listened to anymore. She pointed at her lawn, her dock, her patio, desperate fragments of a kingdom collapsing before her eyes. But the crew kept marking the red line, steady and unemotional. I approached her, holding the survey map open. The red boundary sliced cleanly across her yard like a blade of truth. A truth she had denied for years. She froze. Her eyes widened. Because this time, the line she crossed wasn't metaphorical. It was real, and it was permanent. The final boundary stake struck the soil with a deep, echoing thud. Everything went still. The sunlight brightened across the lake, dancing off the ripples as if sealing the moment. This wasn't just a fence line being marked. This was the verdict. A judgment she could neither shout down nor escape. She stepped back, trembling, her voice finally lost to the truth. The neighborhood watched from behind curtains and porches, witnessing the fall of the storm that had hovered over them for years. Because today, the line drawn across her backyard wasn't just wood or measure. It was the end of her rule. That afternoon, the sky dimmed slightly as clouds drifted across the sun, casting long shadows over the lake. It felt like the world was shifting, realigning itself after years of imbalance. I stood near the water's edge, watching the reflection of the boundary flags ripple across the surface. Each red marker glowed like a quiet warning from nature itself. Behind me, Karen paced her shrinking yard, her steps uneven, her breathing tense. She looked like someone who had just discovered that the ground beneath her wasn't ground at all, just an illusion that finally gave way. And the fall had only begun. The workers measured each section with meticulous precision. Their tools clicked, scraped, and thudded against the soil, marking the truth into the earth inch by inch. The sound echoed across the quiet lakefront, each hammer strike a reminder of how long the neighborhood had lived under her control. Some neighbors peeked from their back windows, faces pressed to the glass, cautiously hopeful. They whispered among themselves, not daring to come outside yet. Karen had ruled them through fear for too long. But today, the fear was crumbling, faster than even they expected. The atmosphere felt charged with overdue justice. I walked along the boundary line the crew had traced. The red markers cut straight through her manicured lawn, slicing across the space she had claimed as her throne. The grass on her side looked untouched, while the land now reclaimed by my ownership felt lighter, freer. The map in my hand fluttered softly in the breeze. For years, she hid behind rules she twisted, regulations she invented, fines she imposed without cause. But the real rules, etched into county records, stood firm. She just never thought anyone would enforce them. But today wasn't about fear. It was about restoration. Karen's movements shifted from frantic to hesitant. She paused near the stake nearest her patio, staring at the ground as though hoping the earth would swallow it. Her breath trembled in the wind. She turned toward the lake, eyes wide, searching for something. Maybe an escape, maybe a loophole, maybe the old confidence she wore like armor. But the lake didn't look back at her. It shimmered with a calm she could no longer disturb. The silence around her didn't carry her power anymore. It carried the weight of truth she had refused to face. And truth always collects its debt. By late afternoon, the HOA board members finally approached her yard. They moved cautiously, like people walking out of a storm shelter after the tornado has already passed. Their eyes flicked between me, the flags, and Karen. For years they had stood behind her, swallowed their discomfort, and let her temper dictate their decisions. Now they looked like people seeing the landscape clearly for the first time. Their voices stayed soft, hushed by the gravity of the moment. Even they realized that the boundary wasn't just a line on the map. It was a line between who they were and who they let her be. Karen's shoulders slumped slightly when she saw them. She seemed smaller, fragile even, stripped of the authority she once wore so proudly. Her gaze flickered between each board member, searching for support, validation, anything to rebuild the throne crumbling beneath her. But none of them moved toward her. None of them spoke. Their silence was louder than any confrontation. It told her that her era, built on fear, manipulation, and loudness, was ending. Her control wasn't slipping through her fingers anymore. It had already fallen, and she stood in the wreckage alone. The workers soon brought out the tall fence posts. Long, heavy, carved pieces of cedar that would soon stand like sentinels along the boundary. The smell of fresh would fill the air, blending with the cool water breeze. I watched as they unloaded each post with careful hands, laying them in a neat line along the yard. Karen's eyes widened with fresh panic. She understood what the fence meant. It wasn't about blocking her view. It wasn't about limiting her space. It was the physical form of truth, permanent, unmistakable, unchallengeable. A truth she could no longer talk her way around. The crew set the first post into the ground. The thud echoed across the lake like a gavel striking wood. A judgment, a verdict, a reminder that consequences eventually arrive for everyone. Karen stepped back, clutching her arms tightly around herself. Her breath shook as she stared at the rising structure, its height towering above her sense of control. The fence wasn't even finished, but it already cast a shadow across her patio. She flinched as the second post went in. Another thud, another truth she couldn't escape. The universe had drawn the line, and she was standing on the wrong side. Neighbors slowly began stepping outside. Not close, not obvious, but cautiously emerging like people who had lived under a long storm and finally saw sunlight. Some stood with their arms folded, others leaned against railings. Their relief wasn't loud. It was quiet, grateful, almost reverent. Karen noticed them. Her face twisted with confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like regret. Perhaps she finally saw what she had become to them. Perhaps she finally realized the fear she cast wasn't leadership. It was oppression. And now, without power, she had no voice left to hide behind. As the sun dipped lower, streaks of orange and gold stretched across the water, illuminating the rising fence line. Each post stood tall, unwavering, marking a boundary that had always existed but was finally being honored. I watched the reflection of the fence ripple in the lake, each wave bending and straightening the image like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. Karen stood frozen beside her patio, silent, motionless, defeated. The fence wasn't just wood. It wasn't just property. It was the moment her dominance fractured, and the neighborhood finally reclaimed its breath. The next morning arrived with a pale silver glow stretching across the lake, diffusing softly through the lingering mist. The air felt colder than usual, still, heavy, like the pause before verdict. When I stepped outside, the construction crew was already unpacking their equipment, their boots pressing firm marks into the damp soil. The scent of freshly cut cedar drifted through the yard. Karen's blinds twitched. She was awake, watching every movement like a person witnessing their own fate unfolding. The fence line stretched across the yard like a scar of truth, one that not even she could deny anymore. The workers moved with disciplined rhythm. Levels clicked, measuring tapes snapped, stakes thudded into the ground with controlled certainty. Each action felt like a chapter closing, a long-awaited correction being written into the land. The neighbors slowly began to gather along the walking trail, their faces quiet, reflective. No one laughed, no one sneered. They stood like witnesses to a shift in the ground beneath them. They weren't watching a fence being built. They were watching years of tension dissolve, board by board, post by post. Even the lake seemed calmer, its surface flat and bright under the emerging sun. Karen eventually emerged from her back door, but not with the storm she usually carried. Her steps were slow, hesitant, her arms wrapped tightly around her, as though shielding herself from a wind that wasn't blowing. She hovered near the old patio, unsure whether to retreat inside or approach the workers. The authority she once wielded so easily now crumbled in her posture. She stared at the boundary line cutting through her yard, cutting through the illusion of control she had built her identity on. This can't be real, her eyes seemed to whisper. But reality was now rooted into the ground. The first fence post rose tall and firm. A beam of sunlight lit its grain, making it glow like a pillar of finality. Karen flinched as the crew poured concrete around its base, like she could feel the permanence settling in. She stepped closer, but stopped when the foreman glanced her way with professional indifference. Her authority didn't reach them. Her orders meant nothing here. This land no longer answered to her voice. Her eyes traced the rising structure with growing dread, and each new post made her shoulders sink lower. She wasn't losing property. She was losing identity. As the fence grew, the HOA board arrived. They clustered near the trail, whispering among themselves as they observed Karen silently unravel. These were the same people who once jumped at her commands, who co-signed her threats, who hid behind her when decisions went wrong. But now they kept their distance, their faces stiff with the realization of how much damage they had allowed. They weren't here to rescue her. They were here to witness the consequence she had earned. Even they understood what the fence represented. Not division, justice. Not punishment, correction. And justice had finally found its footing. Karen approached me then, her footsteps cautious, face tightened with a mixture of fear and disbelief. She hovered a few feet away, as if stepping any closer would force her to confront the truth she had avoided for years. Her gaze darted between the fence and the lake, searching for an argument strong enough to stop time. But there was none. Her power wasn't slipping away. It was gone. What remained was a hollow echo of certainty she once used to intimidate others. The lake glimmered behind me, unbothered, serene. It had outlasted her temper. Now it outlasted her pride. By midday, the fence stretched nearly the full width of her yard, a clean, stunning line that redrew the world as it should have always been. The workers tightened bolts, smoothed edges, and checked alignment. The cedar panels stood perfectly straight, forming a wall of warm, rich wood that contrasted sharply with the cold tension still clinging to Karen's posture. She stared at the divide, her breathing uneven. This was the first time in years that something stood between her and the lake she claimed as her empire. A quiet, irreversible reminder. What she controlled was never truly hers. As the final posts were set, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning mist. The transformation felt symbolic, like the land itself was clearing out the fog she had cast over this community. Neighbors stepped closer now, emboldened by the undeniable finality of what was happening. A few whispered in relief. Others simply watched with softened eyes, as if witnessing a long-awaited healing. Karen sank slowly into a patio chair, her fingers trembling. She stared not at me, not at the fence, but at the lake. And for the first time, she truly saw its distance from her. The crew secured the last beam, and the fence stood complete, tall, unwavering, beautiful in its simplicity. The foreman handed me the final form to sign. As my pen touched the paper, a faint rustle passed through the trees, like nature itself acknowledging the moment. When I stepped back to take in the full view, the scene felt lighter, balanced. A harmony the neighborhood had not felt in a long time settled gently across the water. The fence cast a soft shadow across Karen's yard, a shadow shaped not by hostility, but by truth. Evening drifted in slowly, painting the lake in strokes of orange and gold. The fence glowed beneath the sunset, warm and steady, as though it had always belonged there. Karen remained seated on her patio, silent, still, facing the truth she could no longer outrun. The neighbors returned to their homes, peaceful at last. I stood on my deck, breathing in the crisp air, watching the calm water reflect the fence line like a vow carved into the world. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity. A new beginning built on truth. A boundary drawn and finally respected.